So you're really looking at trying to assess the team, trying to assess the assets, that type of thing.
Okay. All right, so now we're talking a little bit more about the professional fiduciary as you are in your particular profession. What standards does a professional fiduciary have to meet in California in order to be licensed? And how many trusts do you need to manage before you're subject to these requirements?
Let me ask the last one first, otherwise I'll forget what it was. So anything more than 2 cases that you're involved with in a fiduciary capacity, you're starting to bump up against the licensing requirements. And just to run back through the different categories, you could be named as a trustee, could be named as an executor actually doesn't count, I'll correct myself on that. You could be named under a power of attorney, you could be named as a conservator. Any one of those things, more than 2 cases, you should pull up your computer, look at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and have a look at the guidelines for being a California licensed professional fiduciary. So that's really the threshold. In terms of the background that you should have, it's not actually written in the licensing requirements, but I strongly suggest somebody who's looking at this type of thing, or else if you're interviewing a professional fiduciary, look at somebody who's got a pretty strong background, either possibly from the social work end or from the business management end. Maybe a trust officer or somebody who's worked possibly in a public guardian's office, somebody who has a degree in social work, something like that. So a really, really good, strong skill set. In terms of actually getting involved, looking at the Department of Consumer Affairs licensing requirements, they will require 30 hours of specific education. So there's a list of subjects on that which will relate to not only the assets, which we'd call the estate category, so looking at how the different assets are formed, maybe some of the tax background, that sort of thing, but also the person. What we mean by that is how somebody is set up under a conservatorship, the decisions that you should be making in the best interests of the conservatee or the principal under the power of attorney, or as we call it, the advance directive. So you've got several different requirements. Once you've leapt over those thresholds, you'd be looking at getting your fingerprints on file with the FBI, having a background check run, and if you've leapt over all of those hurdles, then you can actually apply to sit for the test.
All right, so there is an examination for this too.
Yes, yes. So, and then you throw yourself on the mercy of the Department of Consumer Affairs, send them a check for the fees, and then within a time period, maybe 4 weeks to 6 weeks, maybe as long as 8 weeks, a license could be issued out to the applicant.
Okay. Okay. Now, when might a family want to have a bank or a trust company as a conservator, trustee, or executor? And what's the difference between a professional fiduciary and using a bank or trust company?
There are significant differences with that, Mike, and probably the biggest ones of those would be the fact that the bank is a California corporation, but not only is it a California or even a national corporation, but they would be licensed to run trust business. So it's a very serious issue for a bank to have trust powers, so they take their job very, very seriously. You're looking at an asset base within a bank, so you're in the old figurative deep pockets arena, so somebody who's a little bit skittish about, does the person or the corporation have the assets to sustain their business, you'd be looking at a bank trust company. Probably the biggest issue overall, though, is that for the most part, a professional fiduciary is an individual rather than a corporation. And so as an individual, you're at risk of the fiduciary either getting sick or injured or something along those lines, whereas technically with a corporation, you have an endless pool of potential trust officers to continue on managing the trust. So you've really got the continuity with a trust company that you would not have with an individual professional fiduciary.
But nonetheless, people are choosing individual trust fiduciaries like you, so why would they choose somebody like you instead of a bank?
It very much comes down to the personal service end, because obviously I'm not reporting to a board of directors, although I am constrained by the guidelines that appoint me as a conservator, the guidelines that appoint me as a trustee, or the guidelines that appoint me under an advance directive as the agent to make the healthcare decisions. But I do have the flexibility as an individual that a corporation would not have. So what you're looking at with a corporation is that they have the auditors coming in on a very, very regular basis, at least two that I'm aware of, their own internal auditors, the FDIC auditors coming in, and maybe the comptroller of currency as well. So they're looking at their guidelines, they're looking at playing by the set of rules that they've had laid out by them, whereas the focus on my business and most of the professional fiduciaries will be to act in the best interests of the client. And I keep mentioning that word, but it's absolutely key. It's not in the best interest of what I do for my business, not how I feel on any particular day, but absolutely in the best interests of the individual. But the underlying issue that will differentiate a professional fiduciary from a corporate fiduciary will be the fact that a professional fiduciary can take on a conservatorship of the person and the role of being an agent under an advance directive. And what that means that they can make placement decisions for the incapacitated person, they can make healthcare decisions for that person, up to and including surgery, for example. And as I say, placement can be a big issue if the elder's no longer able to reside in their own home, whereas typically you'll find a bank will not be able to make those types of decisions. So I'd say that's really the key difference there.
Now, you also have, as in your own business, although, well, one, you've got some backup people behind you in your business. The other is, though, that you sort of have some cross arrangements among some of the other fiduciaries, as I understand it, to sort of, if something happens to Richard, that I can sort of step in to help out. Is that right, or?
Correct. In my particular business, I have two very well-experienced client accounting managers. They have excellent backgrounds in accounting, the bookkeeping, the data entry. They have particular skill sets so far as managing real estate's concerned. So they do a lot of interaction with attorneys, accountants, investment managers, and a lot of times with the beneficiaries of the clients themselves. So that certainly allows me a little bit of time to get some rest and recuperation in my business. So that's absolutely critical. So if I did get hit by a truck, then obviously my two experienced professionals in my office would be able to continue on the business at a lower level, but they would have some continuation. So anybody who's looking at a professional fiduciary should look at the whole operation, what the backup is as well. In terms of the other resources that I have available, and I know some people get very skittish about the word outsourcing, but I do a fair amount of that. The simplest is that I will always have a CPA do the tax returns on my cases. So that's another set of eyes and ears and checks and balances for my clients to make sure that I'm marching down the correct road. And also with regard to, as you mentioned before, the other pool of professional fiduciaries, we have an unusually tight-knit community, particularly within the Bay Area of professional fiduciaries. For example, when one of our members was retiring, we were able to marshal the resources of several fiduciaries who were able to assist with handing off cases and that type of thing. So we were able to keep things running pretty effectively.
Okay. What are the key documents that a professional fiduciary would implement?
That sounds like a really trick question, but I thought about some of the background to that. So what you're talking about implementation would be really the set of rules that I'm going to comply with. So the set of rules that generally, the simplest set of rules would be under a living trust. When a person would establish a living trust, they obviously want to avoid probate, they want to try and avoid a conservatorship, they want to name somebody who's responsible to continue the management of their trust during some level of incapacity and for the distribution after they passed away. So that would probably be the most common document that I'm looking at, is a revocable living trust that would be prepared by the attorney for the individual. So